Welcome back to S4P Radio with your host, myself, Ian Dunican. Okay, so today we're going to have a little brief audio abstract here on a recent paper that I had published, which is called, wait for it, it's a long title, as an engineer said to me recently at swimming, that was a mouthful, and it is The Effect of Water Loading for Acute Weight Loss Following Fluid Restriction on Sleep Quality and Quantity in Combat Sports Athletes. So a lot to break down in this one. Now, this study was conducted a few years ago at the Australian Institute of Sport. And so what we did was we looked at some combat athletes. So quick overview. Let's follow the normal path we do. Introduction and background, the methodology, the results, some of the discussion, and then conclusion of what it means in context of combat sport athletes. So combat sports, for those of you who are not familiar with combat sports, it's generally things like boxing, taekwondo, karate, muay thai, judo, wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, sambo, and mixed martial arts, to name a few. Now, some of these you will see in the Olympics. They will be the kind of amateur ones, and then other ones which you may be familiar with or you see on TV will be like UFC, Bellator, and so on. So these athletes engage in this combat sport, which is pretty tough and pretty serious, and not to be taken lightly if you are thinking about getting into it. I wouldn't be anyway. So what athletes do, and you may have seen this already on TV, is athletes what they have to do is make a weight or make a specific weight. So some people look at this and go, what do you mean by making a weight? So let's take an example of a person who might be 80 kilos. They might sign up or agree to fight at a specific weight, such as 70 kilos. So they've got to lose 10 kilos for that weigh-in. But then what they're going to try and do is regain that weight as quickly as possible after they make the weight before a fight. So for example, a fighter signs up. They've got 6 weeks before a fight. They sign up for the fight, they do their medicals, they're all cleared, and they go ahead. And so what they will do then, they will have two parts of this weight loss, or this is what should happen. You should have what's called like a chronic period or a long period. So typically 4 to 5 weeks for the person who's going to try and lose weight over that time. So for example, it might go from 80 kilos down to 75 kilos, or what's that, roughly like 175 pounds down to about 165 roughly. And then in the week to 10 days before the fight, they're going to try and drop that additional 5 kilos to make 70 kilos. They generally weigh in 24 hours before the fight, and then have 24 hours to refuel and rehydrate as much as possible. Now, some people might say, what's the point in doing that? It's really ridiculous. Well, in striking arts for Muay Thai and boxing and so on, there is actually no advantage, and Dr. Reid Reel, who now works at the UFC Performance Institute in Shanghai, has shown that in some papers where for striking sports, there's no real benefit in cutting weight and regaining it. So even if you regain more than your opponent, you're actually not going to have an advantage. However, in grappling sports and in MMA, there is an advantage. So Reid has also shown this in things like judo, so there is an advantage. And for any of you guys that have watched combat sports, you probably have seen this, where a guy or a girl who rehydrates and refuels to a certain weight and looks way bigger than their opponent, can win the fight. Not always, but generally gives them a better advantage. So you may have seen some other work published in this area previously by people like Oliver Barley, Reid Reel, I know Mark Germain, a few others are interested in this area. You may have heard a podcast recently I did with Corey Peacock, who, coaches people like Michael Johnson, Volkan Oezdemir, and so on the podcast last year, about talking about elements of this as well. So it's a pretty, tough process for somebody to do. And so what happens is people either do, in the week before the fight, they do what's called a low fiber diet or low residue diet, so they remove fiber out of their diet, and what they're trying to do is empty the contents of their gut, really. And then the other strategy that people often do is what's called water loading, where they consume vast amount of water to try and basically trick the kidneys into flushing themselves and dropping weight as well. Or people may do a combination of both. So in our study, what we did was we wanted to see, basically this was a subset of a study that Reid was running at the IS. We wanted to see what was the effect on sleep of these athletes. So we took a bunch of lunatics, 22 of them, to the Combat Sports Centre in Canberra at the Australian Institute of Sport. And we basically locked them up for about 10 days and did lots of tests on them. and they trained about twice a day as well. So we looked at this over a number of nights. I think it was about 8 nights in total, or 9 days for our specific period. So we had a familiarization phase for the first 3 days. Then we had the experimental phase for another 5 days. And then we had the end of the study where they kind of rehydrated and we made sure they were safe before they went off. So we broke the group into we broke the overall group into 2 smaller groups. We had the water loading group and the low residue diet group, or the low fiber group. Now the guys doing the water loading also adhere to the low residue diet as well. And the reason we picked these is because this is what happens. So we didn't just make these up. This is what commonly happens out there. And we wanted to do it in a safe environment. And we wanted to make sure it all kind of went well. Now, Reid was the man looking after the diets. He made sure everybody was getting enough carbohydrates, protein, and fats. And it was all done by body weight. They were getting a lot of calories still a day, probably over about 2,000 for most of them. This was all dependent on their body weight. So nobody was starving to death. They might have been craving certain foods, which some of them did. But nobody was actually going to starve to death on this. And for the water loading phase as well, we give them about 100 milliliters per kilo of body mass for the water loading group, where the control group had 40 milliliters. And then we had a fluid restriction phase where the water loading group went on to 15 mils per kilo of body weight. So basically a lot of water for about 4 days, and then very little water. So most people were having between 8 and 10 liters for 3 or 4 days, and then it went down to about a liter for 1 day, which had to space out across the day, which is quite hard actually. And so that's where a lot of the fluid is lost. So to measure sleep, we use the old ReadyBand, which I validated previously, which I have spoken about ad nauseum on the podcast and on abstracts, so I'm not going to go into that one. There is a blog on that on the website if you want to have a look at that, but the ReadyBand is validated for use. So what did we find? Well, first of all, we had to take one guy out of the group from potential concussion due to doctor's advice, and that was pretty good because I was in the hospital 2 o'clock in the morning with that guy. But thank God he was okay. He went home, he was fine, and he lived to tell a few tales. He was probably a bit annoyed that he couldn't partake in the study, but we did want to look after participants' health first and foremost, as we did for everybody throughout the study as well. It's also worth noting that these guys did train twice a day as well in predominantly grappling arts such as judo, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and so on. 2-a-day sessions were there. We also gave them some more information in relation to performance as well, just to keep them occupied. So these guys, they were about 27 was the average age, roughly about 78 kilos or about 171, 72 pounds, so not huge guys. Height about 177 centimeters, body mass index about 25, roughly about 6 years grappling experience. No reported excessive alcohol consumption in the group or even binge drinking, generally in good health. They all rated their sort of sleep as fairly important for most of the group, or extremely important. Most of them, about 90% of them, didn't even take sleeping medication, so it was quite good. And then we had not really any excessive daytime sleepiness being reported for the group, or any crazy issues around sleep disorders that we could ascertain from the questionnaires. So what did we find? Well, we didn't actually find much, which is interesting. We thought we were going to find a lot of sleep disturbances due to a thing called what's called nocturia, or basically waking up to go to the bathroom, or taking a piss in layman's terms. But we didn't really find that. And so we looked at measures of sleep throughout the week. We looked at the 8 measures, and kind of the ones that we were most interested in was wake after sleep onset. So this is the amount of time that they spend awake, and a fragmentation index as well, so the number of times they get up. And there wasn't really much of a difference in them. Where we did find a difference, though, was probably around the sleep latency. Was around the sleep latency, the time to fall asleep. And we did find some disturbances throughout the night, particularly on night 6. Now, what's interesting about this is in the context of this group is that when we look at other studies outside of athletes, we find that low fiber diets actually cause more awakenings overnight. Now, nocturia does cause a lot of awakenings or getting up to go to the bathroom, but generally in an older population, and because these guys were so young and so fit and healthy, it really wasn't an issue. And it made me also thought as well, a lot of these guys had experience drinking vast quantities of water, and we're able to manage it by going to the bathroom preventively before they go to sleep as well. But in terms of sleep, we didn't really find any negative impact on it as well, which is good. It's good to find negative findings in some ways, because a lot of times we don't report negative findings or false findings, or, where we didn't find that, we find our hypothesis is wrong. It's just important to publish those things, as opposed to always being kind of biased in our approach about, oh yeah, we found this and means this. We didn't really find that. And it's good because it goes hand in hand with Reed Reel's other studies around, no sort of kind of deleterious effects to someone's health in the short term or long term. And Reed's part of his study was pretty in depth, looking at the physiological changes when athletes were making weight. So nothing really kind of too much to report here on this. This was the first investigation now to assess the sleep of combat sport athletes during acute weight loss, and to compare difference in these two weight loss strategies. And regarding pre-competition dietary strategies, investigate diet strategies. It's Friday, I'm trying to get this done. Losing weight via low residue diets, either with or without water loading, appears unlikely to exert a sleep loss related performance reduction in combat athletes. And in Reed's study, when it went in partnership with this, there was no effect on performance either. So, we really didn't find anything. Now, in the context of future work, or in the context of real life stuff, there could be issues. And first of all, what we did find was these athletes only got about 6 hours, 13 minutes a night for the water loading group, and 6 hours, 48 minutes for the control group. Now, both of those measures are significantly underneath the 7 to 9 hours recommended by the Sleep Health Foundation. And it's also been shown that in athletes, they may need more than that, 7 to 9 hours per night for performance reasons and recovery. Now, if you take a fighter in a week of a fight, particularly when they're a high-level professional athlete, this weekend, we have Nate Diaz fighting Jorge Masvidal in the UFC, and if you follow countdowns and embeddeds and all that sort of thing, you would see how much media they have to do during the week. So imagine trying to do all that media, reduce your weight, train, and not to mention, you're going into a fight in your underwear, live on TV in front of, thousands of people in an arena and millions watching it around the world. So that's got to place a stress on you as well. So those other things may have an effect on the athlete and the athlete's sleep. Also as well, the time of training throughout the week. So I spoke to Jordan Sullivan about this on his podcast, The Fight Dietitian. You should check out his work as well. It's excellent about this. And, all these other variables are going to be a factor in how an athlete sleeps in the week before a fight. Also as well, if people are in and around the room playing video games, screaming and roaring and all the hanger-oners, it's all going to reduce the person's sleep in the week before a fight. So we had a very controlled study here. It's interesting. Is it definitive about what happens with combat sports athletes? I don't think so. I think there's more work to be done. It's going to be hard to do it in groups like we did here. I think it's going to have to be case studies, or a series of case studies that we can use to basically, build up what effect is on a fighter in the week before a fight, and individual differences are going to be very present, or are going to be highlighted in such a study. Okay, so I've rambled on enough. Jump down, scroll down there to the show notes in the podcast app, or if you're on the website, and you can click on that link for the full, free, open access paper. To this paper, the effect of water loading for acute weight loss following fluid restriction on sleep quality and quantity in combat sport athletes. It's right down there in the bottom of the show notes, authored by myself, and you can click on that link and get the full open access paper and download it as a PDF. Now, feel free to share that on any social media platform, or wherever you like. And if you got any questions or you got any feedback, please send it through to us. Okay, thank you very much for listening to this audio abstract. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, sleep well.